My school project, I've decided to look at the history of school desegregation, the struggle for equal education for all students. For this project, I'm going to be looking at a few major events that happened in the history of school desegregation. It was a long process, and in many ways, it's still not finished. Here's a timeline of school desegregation. In 1896, separate but equal was passed. In 1951, the Brown family filed legal action. In 1954 was the landmark Brown versus Board of Education decision. In 1957 was the Little Rock 9 occurrence. And in 1963 was the stand in the schoolhouse door occurrence. We're going to look at each of these in greater detail. The Supreme Court case of Plessy versus Ferguson. This was an 1896 Supreme Court case on equal rights. In this case, the court ruled 8-1 in favor of what became known as separate but equal. This ruling was used as a baseline for school segregation. People had decided that segregation was okay, and so this court case gave them legal right to have separate facilities, schools, bathrooms, water fountains, transportation, and various other things for people of color and for people who were white. It was called separate but equal, and that was required by law, but the reality was anything but equal. As you can see in this picture, you can see the difference between an all-white school auditorium and an all-black school auditorium. They were separate, but they were definitely not equal. In 1954, we had the Brown versus Board of Education. Now, this occurred because in Topeka, Kansas, the school district refused to enroll a young black student in the school that was closest to where they live. In fact, this was going on in several different places in 1951, and 5 separate cases were appealed to the Supreme Court under the umbrella of Brown versus the Board of Education. They were challenging the separate but equal doctrine, claiming that they were not being provided equal opportunity for their students. There were some major players in this. Thurgood Marshall would represent the Brown family in Brown versus Board of Education. He would eventually go on to become a member of the Supreme Court itself. The Supreme Court consisted of 9 white males. At the time, no African American had sat on the Supreme Court. The results for the Brown versus Board of Education was a 9-0 unanimous decision to end school segregation. The court declared that the schools should be desegregated with all deliberate speed, and the court declared that separate but equal was a violation of the 14th Amendment. Problems, however, would arise. Not everybody would be in favor of this, and some people would stand in direct opposition. I'm going to talk about a couple of well-known occurrences. One of the most well-known occurrences is the Little Rock 9. In 1957, the Arkansas governor refused to allow 9 black students to attend Little Rock Central High School. In fact, he would even have the National Guard block entrance to these students to prevent them from attending the school. The president at the time of the United States was Dwight Eisenhower, and he federalized the National Guard and sent in U.S. Army troops to the scene, and not to prevent them from attending, but to enforce the law and to protect the students. And while the students were able to attend, they still dealt with numerous issues from the other students. But in 1958, Ernest Green would become the first African American to graduate from Central High School in Little Rock. Another well-known occurrence stood at the collegiate level with the stand in the schoolhouse door occurrence. This took place in 1963 as 3 African American students had enrolled in the University of Alabama. Governor George Wallace refused to let them in, noting that he would stand in the schoolhouse door and prevent it himself. Governor Wallace was a heavy proponent of segregation today, tomorrow, and always. This would occur under a different president. President Kennedy would issue Executive Order 1111, which would federalize the Alabama National Guard and would force the University of Alabama to allow these 3 students to attend school. Segregation is still something that lingers today as well. It's still a problem in our schools. A statistic showed that by 2015, African Americans and Latinos are 8 times more likely to attend high poverty schools. A lot of this has to do with most communities still being segregated by race. We see this even here in our own state of Arkansas, where the Mississippi Delta region, which is home to the state's the largest African American population in our state, and a lot of the schools there are struggling, and a lot of the white students are attending private schools. So these issues of segregation and desegregation are still occurring in our world and in our community today. Thanks to all of our wonderful sources who helped us put together this project.